I'd like to introduce Derek Tekerkov, who's going to come to the stage. He's the initiator of the Strategic Arts Initiative project 25 years ago. But however, he's also an instrumental, influential, and incredibly important McLuhan scholar. He's going to tell us, well, actually, it's a bit of a surprise. He's going to respond to what Arjen had to say, which was wonderful. Thank you, Arjen. And tell us a few other things about McLuhan. So take it away, Derek.
All right.
Yes, please go to the podium.
Well, first of all, a couple of thanks to V2, certainly, to the organization for hosting the second edition of Strategic Arts Initiative. Really, it's been an emotional thing for me. I didn't realize how much before I came here. So it's such a wonderful, and I'm really grateful. Also grateful to Arjen's talk. Very, very thought through, very also profound, with lots of questions which it's not so much answering, it's actually playing with you on these issues. And so what I have been struck with was the selection of cybernetics and Catholicism. I recently was at a conference on McLuhan in Brussels, where Catholicism was used. A whole day was given to two roundtables were given to McLuhan's Catholicism, and I went because I was interested in the topic in general, and I was very surprised at both the honesty and the interest, and by non-Catholics, about that very issue. And it's fascinating the way you've presented it. In fact, you've brought more to it, and I will put you in touch with the guys I thought so interesting. So I won't make it too long, but first of all, the insistence on McLuhan trying to get in touch with the real world. It's very interesting because, in fact, that's really characteristic of him. About the story that you told is true to the extent that it's, as you said, there are several versions of it. I'll give you another story that is supposedly the beginning. They're both 18, him and Tom Easterbrook, who became the head of the economics department at U of T. They're living they just arrived in Winnipeg, and they go to a used bookstore, and they spend an hour looking for books. And then one signals to the other, let's go. And they come to pay for the books, and one of the what's happened? Oh, well. Well, we'll get to that later. One of the books is in the hands of Tom Easterbrook, and it's J.K. Chesterton, What's Wrong with the World? Which, of course, J.K. Chesterton was an Anglo-Catholic poet. And the Anglo-Catholics were actually quite militant. And Chesterton, with What's Wrong with the World, really, the book was quite... But that was in Easterbrook's hand, and McLuhan had in his hands a book about economics. They'll look at each other and say, well, this is more like your kind of stuff. So they exchanged the book right then and there, and McLuhan did say that reading that book was one of the seminal moments of his beginning of reflection, and as I said, he was about 18. But it's true, and the whole question about not believing in God and asking to show, that's a very interesting thing. One of his statements about that he made several times, to me, because he never published anything, or he rarely published any kind of thing like that, but he said, you don't go into the church with arguments. You go on your knees. Yeah, that's pretty cool. From a guy who really had a vision. I must say, I was extremely influenced by his thinking. First of all, I had also been extremely influenced by Théâtre de Chardin, so there was a connection there. So that's the thing about now the trivium. Here, you were wonderful. You explained beautifully the trivium. But one thing is for sure: each one of us has a surfeit of one or the other, and sometimes two. But most of the time, there is an outbalance, an imbalance in our own constitution of the trivium. The trivium is supposedly the beginning of the history of knowledge in the Western world, right? But each one of us has more of a grammatician in us, or more of a rhetorician, or more of a dialectician. And it would be and I've made questionnaires, like, the Elle magazine kind of questionnaire. I've made questionnaire for people to find out how much they were more grammatician or logician or rhetorician. The reason I bring it up is because of McLuhan's distaste for Havelock. Marshall loathed philosophers, conceptualists, modelists. He could never say anything nastier. About Shannon is all about transportation, nothing to do with transformation. Shannon's theory is transportation theory. We don't need that. What we need is transformation theory. So that was like his comment on Shannon. But to come back about, no, check it out. Havelock was a dialectician, according. I found Havelock fascinating. I love the book. It's very useful, and I've used it as much as I could for my own work. But Marshall didn't like him. Marshall had a devotion for Innis. A devotion for Innis. He said, Innis, every sentence of Innis is a research thesis. Every sentence of the book. The guy, he said, he had the most concentrated way of writing. He just inseminated the book, literally. And so he was a pure grammarian. So where does that, I'll have a little bone of contention with you about McLuhan being a grammarian. No. Marshall was the first hypertextual writer. He was a rhetorician. He used techniques to persuade his public. Dominancy. Yes, he had ideas, no question about it. But the rhetorician is a person who, Marshall had pure theories about putting on the audience. You know, how the actor has to put on the audience or else it's not a work. The king's gesture and the liberty of the king's gesture in relationship to the people and the king. All these, lots of stuff that comes out from it. Anyway, that was something about the, which I thought very, very exciting. Great review of David Olson's book. About that, about an interesting expression, this ectoplasm business. I knew David very well, and I never thought that he would talk about ectoplasm, but anyway, he did. So my interpretation of the same problem of, and you really made it very clear, this idea of the meaning is behind the text, and the truth is behind the text, and the ego is in front. The way I see it, and I worked on this because of the alphabet and the brain, the way I see it is when you read, and it took a long time to get there, but when you read, you silence language. And by silencing language, you internalize it. And by internalizing it, you actually control it. And by controlling it, you develop a subject of control. And you develop a certain distance, and you develop subjecthood from internalizing the process of reading. So I thought it was an interesting kind of another way of looking at it. The reason it's important to pay attention to that, I see we have some real problem here. The reason it's important to pay attention to that is that when you are looking at what's happening today, in relation to how we do reading, in relation to how we relate to things, it's all happening through this, right? So instead of internalizing language, you're actually externalizing it away. Again, you know? And by externalizing it, you're also yielding to the system more power. So that instead of having complete control of your reading material, which is what you have when it's written on paper, you are delegating a lot of your cognitive faculties to deal with it to a machine. And having done this, you also connect with 100 other people, which means that you suddenly change the grounds of your ego. And you change many of the relationships that you have in cognitive functioning. So the relationship between books and person is a moment in history that is now being challenged by externalizing that person and putting it on either on network or on screen. So I'm going to be talking about this thing. In fact, I'm going to show you, since we are here, what is this unhappy thing here? I cancel something? Yeah, no? Okay then. It's not okay. It's not very happy at all. It's totally unpleased. Let me see this. This is, no, the goddess of technology always does that to me. I can do without technology, that's not a problem. But I wanted to show you something in the order of that sort of argument. Oh yes. I mean, the way you put it was really quite wonderful about, you know, you didn't commit yourself. That was very interesting. The way you actually say, well, McLuhan, you know, he had once decided that the Catholic Church is the one that has the truth, and then he goes to church, and that's you know, and then it reminds me of one of the ridiculous things that McLuhan used to say. I may be wrong, but I'm never in doubt. So it's one of those very, very many things that he had. Yeah, there are a few other things. Can somebody sort of come into my rescue, or is it something that I'm doing wrong? Wait a minute. There we are. All right. So yes, this was the. There's so many things here. This is one of the things that I wanted to begin with. It's one of the things that sort of puts the artist in in the focus. When my real talk is about the global art and then trying to understand what's happening here. But this is interesting. Today, this is a thing he wrote in 87. Today, that was published in 51 and was republished in 87. Today, we get inside the machine. It is inside us. We in it. Fusion, oblivion, safety. Now the human machines are geared to smash one another. You can't shout warnings or encouragement to these machines. First, there has to be a retracing process, a reduction of the machine to human form. Kirke or Circe, only turn men into swine, our problem is tougher. Interesting kind of statement. Another one which I find important. Now, how do I get to fill the screen with this thing? See, I'm not used to this kind of Microsofty thing. And where is it? Oh, I see. Well, you see, this is really not at all intuitive, right? All right. So you mentioned this in your talk, Arjen, and I'm repeating it because I think that what began for me, this whole adventure where we are now, that we're sharing, comes not just from this. It actually starts with Théâtre de Chardin for me. I was 18 when I read Le Phénomène Humain, and I was bowled over by the whole idea of the noosphere. I thought, yes, now that's a real thought. There is such a thing. Théâtre de Chardin is a French priest, philosopher, Jesuit, who was a researcher as well into paleontology. And his books were put to the index by the church because he was not believing in evil enough. But the book, the Phénomène Humain, is an astounding understanding of the various forces that lead geology to produce biology and biology to produce psychology. That means the kind of growth from beneath, a radial power, as he called it. And so then I get this kind of thought, which was extremely inspiring. What inspired McLuhan is this one by Filippo Marinetti. Time and space died yesterday. We already live in the absolute because we have created eternal omnipresent speed. This would be a typical kind of thing, and for the sake of time, I won't show you what you probably already have seen, which is in Italian too. Who understands Italian here? Okay, that's I can't impose to the rest. You have access to this thing online. In any case, as I said, it's a discourse on how Marinetti proposed futurism as something which actually gets rid of all the traditions and moves on into a creation of a new world based on technology and based on the powers of electricity. And so that's one. Then we have the famous, it's a kind of a story. There is a much, much longer story of sensibility, of global sensibility beginning. But the idea of McLuhan, when he says that Sputnik transformed the world in a work of art, a programmable thing, that's where suddenly you find more and more artists who are using media in order to create their pieces. In this case, here's a description of what he did when he actually phoned to the head of a factory to actually take down his instruction on a square paper and then have that painting done at a distance by telephone. Sounds like very little today, but of course it was something quite extraordinary to do. And in fact, he was criticized because they said that was not his own hand. So you can see that he was dealing with an entirely different culture, and he was doing a very interesting countercultural thing. Nam June Paik, of course, this is one of the first big global action by a very important artist. Again, I have a piece, I don't know, we can try it. I have one of the pieces of the Good Morning, Mr. Orwell. Who has already seen some of those? Well, then it's worth looking at one of them. It's one with Merce Cunningham, if this works. Yes, it does. Oh, how wonderful. Oh, and do we have sound? We should have sound. We don't have sound. Oh, yeah, we do. Watch the big TV screen behind.
salle à manger, accroché dans la chaise à droite. Impossible. Aucun musicien ne pourra jamais communiquer ça. Tandis que la main, si Jardou peint la salle à manger, le chapeau à plumes et tout ce qu'on vient de décrire, il communique même beaucoup plus qu'en parlant. Parce qu'on a la subtilité des nuances et même on peut voir les plumes que si on souffle vont bouger au moment où on souffle sur ces plumes. Maintenant,
I think we have the benefit of time, but it gives you an idea, and again, you will have access to that. Just learning how to do this, so.